I couldn't seem to get my speech beyond 10 minutes. All right. Good morning, fellow patriot Aussies. I did stand as a candidate for Rise Up Australia Party because I was not impressed with a lot of the politicians and their inactivity, and a lot of us were not impressed. So we felt we had to do something. So I'll mention that a little bit later. But I want to start with Paris as well, and I'm going to read my speech, if you don't mind. Just after the coordinated suicide attacks in Paris, I heard an expert on terrorism saying that this act of terrorism should not be politicised, that politicians should not comment on it, a view that any number of commentators and so-called experts seem to agree with. Well, I would like to ask, who then decides whether or not Australia goes to war? Who is responsible for proposing and passing laws that protect us from acts of terrorism? Who controls immigration into our country? Who writes the policies enabling freedom of speech or not? Who would be responsible for drafting legislation banning groups that incite violence against any individual or people who are not Muslim? Politicians. No one needs to politicise acts of terror against a nation, because terrorist acts by default are political. They are a declaration of war on a culture and a country, which is why the French president initiated airstrikes against ISIS after the Paris attacks. Who are the ones that decide what will be taught in our schools? Politicians. Take, for example, Julia Gillard's government using taxpayer money for the printing and distribution of books in conjunction with the Islamic Council of Australia on how peaceful and morally good Islam is and on how to become a Muslim. Putting these books into public schools. Now guess which schools are being reported as producing the so-called radicalised Islamic youth? Public schools. I heard it on the news. We boot the Christian God out and replace him with Allah. That's not good enough. And by the way, are we happy with the recent practice of allowing Muslim students to walk out of class so that they don't have to sing our national anthem? No, absolutely not. We are here today rallying because successive lawmakers and politicians are not or have not been taking the necessary steps and drafting the needed laws to properly safeguard our nation and its heritage.
Why not?
Why not indeed? You know, a lot of good-hearted, sincere Aussies are beginning to wake up and stand up and say, we need true Aussies in the political scene. Okay, we are here today rallying, and politicians cannot possibly stay out of the discussion. That's what I would like to say. Instead, they need to have the integrity, the courage and the wisdom to call Islam what it is, a dangerous ideology, and there's no room for it in this nation. They need to take firm steps to safeguard this nation. We know the threat of terrorism is coming from one main people group, and that group is Muslim.
One main book.
One main book, the Quran, you're right. I stood as a candidate in the last federal election because so many of these politicians and leaders were displaying such ignorance regarding the negative impact Islam and multiculturalism were already having in Australia, an impact that was clearly evidenced in Europe and other Western countries. We see what is happening now with mass migration of Muslims into Europe, the chaos, the violence and disrespect of host countries that have opened their borders to these mostly young, male, illegal immigrants. Mainstream media is biased. They don't show you that footage. You have to look on social media outlets. ISIS is already boasting that they have smuggled in at least 4,000 jihadist fighters among the so-called refugees to Europe. A bit like the old file in the cake smuggled into a prisoner, I think.
Or the Trojan horse.
I stood for Rise Up Australia Party because they believe in keeping Australia Australian. One law, one culture, no Sharia law. No Sharia law. In the 2013 federal election, Rise Up Australia Party, founded by Daniel Nalaya in 2010, contested seats in almost every state and territory, standing a total of 93 candidates, 77 in the lower house and 16 in the upper. From 2013 on, Daniel Nalaya successfully lobbied the current coalition government, then led by Prime Minister Tony Abbott, in changing the name of the Immigration Department from Immigration and Multicultural Affairs to Immigration and Border Protection. We are a tolerant and welcoming nation. Australia should receive genuine refugees from persecuted minority groups such as Yazidis, Kurds and Christians.
Muslim scum.
Any Sunni or Shia Muslim refugees, particularly from Syria or Iraq, should be welcomed by the wealthy Muslim nations who, as Bill suggested, who aren't taking anybody. There's got to be an agenda here, apart from the fact that Muslims know full well that Muslims are dangerous. Most Muslims appear to have no ultimate aim of assimilating into Western culture. We've heard it said, not all Muslims are terrorists, but most, if not all, terrorists are Muslim. And I've got an M&M analogy as well. Mine's slightly different from Bill's, but it goes like this. When anyone entering the country is found to be carrying a deadly virus, did the authorities say it's too mean to quarantine the whole group just because some of them might be dangerous or deadly? No, they don't. They quarantine everyone until the threat is dealt with. By closing our borders to some Muslim groups, we are not suggesting that all Muslims are terrorists. But where there is a hidden and dangerous agenda that threatens our nation, closing the borders would prevent that agenda from being implemented. Most Muslims would be happier living in a nation that has the same ideological beliefs as they do. Otherwise, I feel inclined to question their motives. It is ludicrous that we've come to the point of having to hold rallies in order to fight for the protection of our national identity and security. It is pathetic for people who hold different opinions from ours to label us with names such as Islamophobe or racist, just for drawing attention to the very real threat posed by Islam to this nation. For the record, Islam is an ideology, not a race. And I would just like to say, those people who resort to name-calling, all that indicates to me is that they have absolutely no substance to their arguments. They've got nothing better to rely on than name-calling. I'd like to quote from Winston Churchill now. If you will not fight for right when you can easily win without bloodshed, if you will not fight when your victory is sure and not too costly, you may come to the moment when you will have to fight with all the odds against you and only a precarious chance of survival. There may even be a worse case. You may have to fight when there is no hope of victory, because it is better to perish than to live as slaves. End of quote. We are rallying for a valid cause. Do not say to yourselves, I am one person, and what can one person do? To anyone who thinks that or says that, I would like to respond with this. We are all one person, and we are becoming the turning tide against this threat to our national security. I would like to encourage you all to write to politicians and newspaper editors and express your concerns. We need to keep the pressure up. Encourage others to come to these rallies and very importantly, vote for those politicians who are standing against the threat to our Australian way of life and our laws. I have some Rise Up Australia brochures with me if anyone would like to take and read. Thank you for coming and thank you very much for listening.
Thank you, Pam. That was a great and inspiring speech from a Townsvillian, eh? Fancy that. But we actually like Townsville these days because I'm a very proud North Queensland Cowboy supporter.